Exposed my cheating fiancé. Parents begged forgiveness, then uncovered dad's affair. Mom left after 30 years. My fiancé, 29 male, and I, 27 female, had been together for nearly 7 years. We met in college, fell in love, and had what I believed was the kind of love story that people dreamed of. Our families were close, our future seemed certain, and our wedding was just 3 months away. But that illusion shattered in a way I never saw coming. It started with a strange message on his phone. We were at dinner with my parents when he left his phone on the table to use the bathroom. A notification popped up, a heart emoji from an unknown number. I wasn't the kind of person who snooped, but something about that moment gnawed at me. My gut told me to look. I dismissed it, telling myself I was just being paranoid, but later that night, when he was asleep, I found myself staring at his phone again. I don't know what compelled me, but I picked it up. His password hadn't changed. I scrolled through his messages, and there he was. A long string of texts from someone named S. The messages weren't innocent. They were flirtatious, full of inside jokes, pet names, and plans to meet. My hands shook as I read them. There were pictures too, ones that left no room for doubt. My heart felt like it was being ripped out of my chest. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't even breathe. I sat in our living room, numb, as the person I thought I knew became a stranger. The next day, I confronted him. He tried to deny it at first, but when I showed him the messages, his face drained of color. He stammered out excuses, stress, cold feet, a mistake. He said it was a one-time thing, a lapse in judgment. But the messages told a different story. They'd been seeing each other for months. I packed a bag and left that night. I didn't tell my parents why. I just told them the wedding was off. They were shocked, of course, but I wasn't ready to explain. I needed time to process what had happened. A few days later, my mom called. She wanted me to come over for dinner. She said she and my dad were worried about me. I agreed, thinking it would be good to be around family. Maybe they could help me make sense of the chaos. When I arrived, they sat me down and asked what was going on. I broke down and told them everything, the texts, the betrayal, the lies. I expected them to be furious on my behalf, to support my decision to walk away. But instead, my mom sighed heavily and my dad looked uncomfortable. "Sweetheart," my mom said, "I know this is hard, but maybe you should give him another chance. People make mistakes." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "Are you serious? He cheated on me? He lied to me for months." "I understand," my dad said, "but relationships are complicated. Marriage is about forgiveness." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My parents, the people who raised me to value honesty and integrity, were asking me to forgive the unforgivable. They kept saying things like marriage is a commitment, that love requires sacrifice. It felt like they were more concerned about the wedding than my happiness. The conversation grew more heated until I couldn't take it anymore. I stormed out, feeling more betrayed than ever. That night, I thought about their words. I tried to rationalize their perspective, but I couldn't. I wasn't ready to forgive him. I didn't even know if I wanted to. Then, something happened that changed everything. A few days later, I got another call, this time from my mom. Her voice was shaky. She asked me to come over again, but this time, it wasn't about me. It was about her. When I arrived, she was sitting on the couch, her eyes red and puffy. She clutched a crumpled tissue in her hand. My dad wasn't home. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I sat down next to her, worried. She took a deep breath and began to speak. "I found something," she said, her voice breaking. "Your father, he's been having an affair." The room spun. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My parents had always seemed solid, like the foundation of our family, and now this? She told me how she found out, a series of emails she stumbled upon while using his laptop, messages to a woman I'd never heard of, plans for secret meetings, and declarations of love that made her stomach turn. I confronted him, she said, tears streaming down her face. He admitted it. He's been seeing her for over a year. I was in shock. My father, the man who told me to forgive my fiancé, was a hypocrite. He'd been preaching forgiveness while betraying his own vows. "I can't stay with him," my mom said, her voice trembling. 30 years of marriage, and he threw it all away. Hearing her say that broke something inside me. Suddenly, my own pain seemed trivial. My mother, the strongest woman I knew, was crumbling before me. "I'm so sorry, Mom," I whispered, pulling her into a hug. We sat there for hours, crying and talking. She asked if I'd forgive my fiancé, and I told her I didn't know. She said she didn't expect me to have an answer, but she wanted me to know that sometimes, walking away is the strongest thing you can do. By the time I left, my mind was reeling. I hadn't just lost my future with my fiancé, I was losing the family I thought I knew. The next few days were a blur. My mom moved in with me temporarily while she figured out what to do. My dad kept calling, trying to explain, but she wasn't ready to hear it. One night, as we sat together, she asked me a question that shook me to my core. "Do you think I should forgive him?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. I didn't know what to say. A part of me wanted to scream, no, but another part remembered all those years of laughter, love, and memories. Could you really throw that away? I don't know, I admitted, but whatever you decide, I'll support you. And that's when I realized something. Forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about finding peace within yourself. I'm still figuring out what that means for me, but one thing is certain, this isn't just my story. It's my mom's story too, and together, we'll find a way to heal. The days following my mom's revelation were heavy. My once stable world now felt like a house of cards collapsing around me. My dad kept calling, sending messages, even leaving flowers at my door, but my mom wasn't ready to talk. She was staying with me, but the silence in my apartment was deafening. We were both grieving in our own way. Me over the future I lost with my fiancé, her over the 30-year marriage she thought was unshakable. One evening, as we sat in the living room, she broke the silence. "Do you remember when you were little, and your father used to read you bedtime stories?" she asked, her voice distant. I nodded, unsure of where she was going with this. "I used to stand by the door and listen," she continued. "Back then, I thought he was perfect. A good father, a good husband. But now, I keep asking myself if I missed the signs." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to comfort her, but another part was still furious at my dad for what he did. Not just to her, but to us. "You couldn't have known," I finally said. "People hide things, they wear masks." She nodded, but her eyes were filled with doubt. I wonder if I could have prevented it, if I had been different, more attentive, less focused on work. "Don't do that," I interrupted, my voice firm. "This isn't your fault, he made his choice." Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the strong woman I'd always admired. "You're right," she said quietly. "But it's hard not to wonder." We sat in silence after that, both lost our thoughts. A few days later, my dad showed up unannounced. I opened the door to find him standing there, looking worn and defeated. He asked if he could come in and talk to my mom. I hesitated but eventually let him in. She was sitting at the dining table when he walked in. The tension in the room was suffocating. "I'm sorry," he began, his voice cracking. "I know I've hurt you in ways I can never undo. I was selfish and stupid, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But I love you. I've always loved you." My mom didn't say anything, she just stared at him, her expression unreadable. "I know you have no reason to believe me," he continued, "but the affair, it's over. I ended it. I want to fix this, if you let me." The room fell into an uneasy silence. Finally, my mom spoke. "You think it's that simple?" she asked, her voice cold. "You think ending the affair erases what you did?" "No," he admitted, "but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn your trust back." Her eyes welled up with tears, but she didn't let them fall. "Trust? How can I trust you again? You lied to me for over a year." "I know," he said, his voice breaking, "and I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you, if you'll let me." She looked away, her hands trembling. "I need time," she finally said. "I don't know if I can forgive you, and I don't know if I want to." He nodded, his eyes filled with pain. "I understand. Take all the time you need. Just know that I'm not giving up on us." After you left, my mom broke down. I held her as she sobbed, feeling helpless. There were no easy answers, no quick fixes. That night, I lay awake thinking about everything. My parents' situation felt like a mirror of my own, but with one key difference: time. They had decades of memories, of love, of shared history. Did that make forgiveness easier or harder? The next morning, my mom surprised me. "I decided to meet with a counselor," she said. "Not just for me, but for us. I need clarity, and I think talking to someone might help." I was relieved. It felt like a step forward, even if it was a small one. A few days later, I received a call from my ex-fiancé. I hadn't spoken to him since I left. Hearing his voice brought back a flood of emotions: anger, sadness, confusion. "I know I'm the last person you want to hear from," he said, "but I need to say this. I'm sorry. I messed up in the worst way possible, and I'll regret it forever. But I love you, and I want to make things right." I didn't know how to respond. His words felt hollow after everything he'd done, but a part of me, deep down, wanted to believe him. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said, my voice shaking. "You broke my trust." "I know," he said, "and I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove I'm serious. Therapy, counseling, anything. Please, just give me a chance." His plea hung in the air, heavy with desperation. I told him I needed time to think and hung up. That night, I sat down with my mom. I told her about the call, about how conflicted I felt. She listened quietly before offering her perspective. "Forgiveness is a process," she said. "It's not about forgetting or excusing what they did. It's about finding peace for yourself. Whether you stay with him or not, you need to decide what will bring you peace." Her words stuck with me. I realized I wasn't just grieving the loss of my relationship. I was grieving the loss of who I thought I was with him. In the weeks that followed, my mom and I both took small steps toward healing. She continued her counseling sessions, and I started seeing a therapist too. it helped more than I expected. Eventually, my mom decided to meet with my dad for a counseling session. It was tense and emotional, but it was a start. She wasn't ready to take him back, but she was willing to listen. As for me, I still hadn't made a decision about my ex-fiancé, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to rush it. Update. The months that followed were a whirlwind of emotions for both my mom and me. Life didn't return to normal, but it found a new rhythm, one filled with therapy sessions, long conversations, and a lot of introspection. My mom had continued counseling with my dad, but they were still living apart. I could see the toll it was taking on both of them. Despite everything, my dad remained persistent. He sent handwritten letters, flowers, and even started attending individual counseling on his own. He admitted that he had spent years suppressing feelings and making poor choices instead of confronting his problems. One evening, my mom came back from a session looking more at peace than she had in months. She sat down with me and told me she was considering reconciliation, not because she had fully forgiven him, but because she believed in the possibility of healing. "I don't want to live in bitterness," she said. "I'm not doing this because it's easy, but because I believe people can change if they're willing to do the work. Your dad is trying, and I need to see where that leads." I was shocked but understood. Their relationship had decades of history. If she could find peace in rebuilding, who was I to judge? Around the same time, I found myself at a crossroads with my ex-fiancé. He was consistent in his efforts, attending therapy and regularly checking in with me. Not to pressure but to show he was committed to change. My anger had softened, though the hurt remained. One night, I met him for coffee after months of no face-to-face contact. Seeing him again stirred emotions I wasn't prepared for. He looked remorseful, and for the first time, I believe he truly understood the gravity of his actions. "I've been in therapy," he began. "Not just for us, but for myself. I had to understand why I did what I did, and it wasn't about you. It was about me running from my insecurities and fears. I know it's going to take a long time to earn your trust back, but I'm willing to try, if you'll let me." I stared into my cup, feeling the weight of his words. "I don't know if I can ever fully trust you again," I said honestly. "But I do see that you're trying. That means something." We agreed to take things slowly, no labels, no pressure, just two people trying to rebuild what was broken. Meanwhile, my mom and dad were doing the same. They began spending more time together outside of counseling. It wasn't perfect, there were setbacks, arguments, and moments of doubt, but they were learning how to communicate again. A pivotal moment came during a family gathering. My mom invited my dad, something I didn't expect. She said she wanted to see how it felt to have him back in a familiar setting. I was nervous, but surprisingly, it went well. My dad was respectful, attentive, and genuinely trying to reconnect. Not just with my mom, but with me too. At the end of the evening, my mom pulled me aside. "I'm not saying it's all fixed," she whispered. "But tonight, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope." That word stuck with me. Hope. It wasn't a guarantee of a happy ending, but it was a start. As for my ex-fiancé and me, our journey was still uncertain. We continued therapy separately and eventually together. There were moments when I felt overwhelmed, questioning if I was making the right choice. But then, there were also moments when I saw glimpses of the man I fell in love with, the one who was kind, thoughtful, and dedicated. One evening, after a particularly emotional session, he said something that stayed with me. "I know I'll never undo what I did, but I want to spend the rest of my life showing you that I'm better than the man who hurt you." It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was honest, and in that honesty, I found a sliver of hope for us too. In the end, forgiveness wasn't a straight path. It was messy, painful, and slow, but it was also freeing. Whether my mom fully reconciled with my dad or I found a way forward with my ex-fiancé, the journey wasn't about forgetting the past, but learning to live beyond it. Months later, my mom made her decision. She decided to move back in with my dad, not because everything was magically fixed, but because she believed in the possibility of rebuilding. She set boundaries and made it clear that trust would take time. My dad accepted this wholeheartedly. As for me, I'm still on my own path. I'm not rushing into anything, but I'm open to the idea that people can change. Whether my ex-fiancé and I make it or not, I've learned that healing starts with choosing what brings you peace. And sometimes, peace comes from letting go of the anger and embracing the uncertainty of hope.